Hi and welcome back to Tales from the GULAG, my case against the ALP, Part 5, Labor's War on Life. Last video we had been talking about Labor's war on human rights, and if you want to talk about human rights, I don't know how much more basic you can get than to talk about the right to life itself. Human life is specifically protected in the Old Testament. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has made mankind. That's from Genesis chapter 9 verse 6. And then of course there is the fifth commandment, you shall not kill. There are two issues worthy of note regarding Labor's attacks on life. At the beginning of life and at the end of life, abortion and euthanasia. The abortion debate hinges on the question of when does a collection of cells become a human being, and during the development of abortion policy we have seen shifting goalposts from pro-abortionists. Pro-lifers argue that any line drawn by abortionists can only be arbitrary. Is it when you detect a heartbeat? Or is it when a fetus can feel pain? Or is it when the life is viable? The only line you can draw is at conception, because at that point the DNA of the new life is set, and it is then a question of the state of development. One clincher of an argument is the testimony of a former abortionist with Planned Parenthood, who explained why she no longer does abortions. Planned Parenthood wanted to make the procedure less haphazard, and so they provide ultrasound devices so that the abortionist can see where they're poking around. Big mistake. Because the abortionist could now see that what they were dealing with was a child. It is precisely this reason that the pro-abortionist lobby hates images of fetuses, because at heart we all know that that fetus is in fact a human being, as does the pregnant woman when she loses that fetus. And therefore the abortionists have to now come up with campaigns like Shout You're Abortionist to convince women that it is actually okay and it's like just a normal part of life, like a rite of passage to have an abortion. Labor's policy platform embraces a woman's right to reproductive health. Sounds fine, but what is meant is the right to abortion. And this is not new because it was Labor that legalised abortion in the first place in Australia. Recently, the Greens in Australia have introduced a bill that is the most extreme of all among various states in Australia that have produced varying degrees of extremity. Well, these are the Greens' proposals for South Australia. They want to allow abortion up to birth and for any reason or none. They want to permit self-selective abortions. So if you don't want to have a girl, you can do away with it. They want to remove the need for a woman seeking an abortion to be examined by two doctors. In fact, she wouldn't need to see a doctor at all. According to the Greens, she could see a nurse, a midwife, or pharmacist. They want to allow do-it-yourself medical abortions at home, that is, the prescribing of abortion drugs, including regional areas hours away from medical assistance. They want to deny vulnerable women and couples last-minute help by placing euphemistically named 150-metre health access zones around abortion clinics. So the maximum penalties for even communicating with someone about a pregnancy-related matter in such a zone would be $10,000 fine or 2 years jail. That's a fine or jail for wanting to help a woman seeking abortion by even just presenting the actual options and presenting the other side of the argument before she finally commits herself. And as for do-it-yourself abortions, well, hey, when they first legalised abortions, one of the big arguments was we don't want to have do-it-yourself backyard abortions with the coat hangers. Well, sort of seems to me like they're going back to that original setup, but now legalising it. And of course, the Greens' proposals for South Australia is only trumped by the infamous bill in Virginia in the United States, which wants to allow abortion just after birth. This is genuine infanticide, as was admitted by Governor Northam over there. So now, while the South Australia bill has been proposed by the Greens, there is a clear alliance between Labor and the Greens, and the pattern is where the Greens go, so does Labor in the end. And it does give an indication of where things are going. When abortion was first legalised, it was meant to be with the approval of 2 doctors who would attest that it was not in the woman's health interest to go on with a pregnancy. And even then, it was up to the first trimester. It was argued that we do not want to go on forcing a woman to have a backyard job with coat hangers. And now, apparently, under this proposal, she doesn't even need the doctor's advice. Again, this bill has been proposed by the Greens and not by Labor, but it will be instructive to see how the vote goes and who voted in favour when it actually comes to the vote in Parliament. So now to the attack on life at the other end, that is euthanasia. Euthanasia is one of those issues that is guaranteed to tug at the heartstrings because there are many instances of, say, the dad who has dementia in his final years, or there's the grandma who is dying of cancer and who wants to see a loved one suffer. And so the argument is given that we end the suffering of our dog, so why not show the same mercy for a human? And it does make a powerful argument, and certainly it does target our heartstrings. But now, let's quickly tackle the dog equivalence. In fact, we put down a dog because we don't think Pooch, as loved as he may be, to be worth sinking endless money to keep him going, and so we put the Pooch down. A human life, though, is actually worth much more. But while it's an issue that tugs at the heartstrings, emotion never makes for good public policy. The truth is that wherever euthanasia has been allowed, it quickly becomes a slippery slope, just as we have seen in the abortion debate, where the standards are lowered and lowered to the point where there is no longer a need to be terminally ill, but simply to be emotionally distressed to qualify. Now that euthanasia has been allowed in the Netherlands for 30 years, that country has had a growing suicide tourism industry. According to the BBC, 29-year-old Aurelia Brewers took poison supplied by a doctor and laid down to die. But no, she did not have cancer. She did not have dementia. She was not suffering, except that she was just depressed. And the slippery slope, as we have observed it, becomes compulsory euthanasia. According to the UK's Independent newspaper, in 2017, a doctor was cleared of any wrongdoing after he put down an 85-year-old unnamed woman with dementia. She woke up from her anaesthetic when the doctor was to administer the lethal injection. Apparently, the woman had previously expressed a desire to die when the time was right, and now that the time was right in the doctor's opinion, because she had been deteriorating, now that she woke up and was resisting, the doctor asked the family to hold her down while he did the deed. It would seem that, yes indeed, despite her struggles and protests, she did indeed want euthanasia, and the doctor had the paperwork to prove it. It seems that in this case, voluntary euthanasia had indeed become compulsory euthanasia. You see, what we miss in this whole emotional debate is current laws against euthanasia are there to, in fact, protect the vulnerable. And in a footnote, the Independence article notes that the Dutch Parliament was considering legislation allowing euthanasia for those now over 75 who are simply tired of life. An actual working example of the slippery slope argument at work. And of course, we should be reminded of the bureaucratic approach to Charlie Gard and be wary of this slippery slope. Now again, the Charlie Gard case was not actually euthanasia, it was simply withdrawing the treatment in spite of the protests of the parents and in spite of offers for help for treatment, experimental treatment, that would be at no cost to the parents or to the UK government. Now, the Charlie Gard case and similar cases are a reminder to us to be wary of this slippery slope, because why treat the elderly and the depressed or the ill when we can just snuff them out more cheaply? We should note that the link between abortion and euthanasia with the Holocaust is real. The Holocaust against the Jews is one of those infamous events in history because of its mass murder on an industrial scale using industrial-style methods. And by doing so, Hitler gave the left the perfect instrument with which to attack their opponents and bludgeon them into silence. Of course, less well known is the incredible bloodshed by the Soviets and other socialist governments. And so it is well worthwhile to look at the culture that gave rise to the Holocaust and how Nazi ideology was able to turn an otherwise decent people into one capable of that kind of horror. Leftists will tell you that the Holocaust had its origins in propaganda against the Jews, which we would now call hate speech. And while there is some truth in that, it is not the whole picture. At the end of World War II, the Allies set out to discredit Nazi doctrine. The Nuremberg trials were an effective tool in this because they highlighted the brutality arising from this ideology. But even a little bit earlier, the Anglo-Americans would also confront Germans with the consequences of Nazism by showing them their local concentration camps. It was all an attempt to discredit Nazi ideology. Now, the question has to be, why was this so effective? It was because, like most of us, the Germans are essentially a decent, peaceful people. Before the rise of the Nazis, it is true that there was this division within German society between them and the Jewish population. But that said, Germans did often have Jewish neighbours, Jewish teachers, Jewish doctors and shopkeepers, and happily and peacefully dealt with each other, and in many cases indeed have friendships between them. What changed? For that matter, an often overlooked fact is it is noteworthy that even among the SS, the people that actually had to do the shootings and the killings, well, Heinrich Himmler noted the decline in morale among those that actually had to line up the Jews and physically shoot them. Why? Because when you're that up close, you can see that the people that you are executing are in fact human, and that tugs at the consciences of even among the most hardened consciences, even with Heinrich Himmler himself. So how do you turn an otherwise decent people into a people that was capable of mass murder? Relentless ideology and propaganda was there for sure, but it also took an ideology where there is no right or wrong, only of what is useful to advance the cause of the party and the ideology. The climate was also set by creating a culture of death by liberalised abortion and euthanasia. Added to that, you had the destruction of due process by law as Hitler accrued more and more power to himself. And then finally, there was a culture of silence where people were unable to speak out. They were simply intimidated into silence, even if they did know what was going on and their consciences were pricked. So is this to imply that Bill Shorten is planning his own, say, anti-Jewish Holocaust or anti-Christian Holocaust? Probably not. Then again, there is no evidence that Hitler was planning the gas chambers as he took power in 1933, or even that he when he, say, invaded Russia in 1941. What I am saying is that Labor's no-rules culture, so typical of the left, combined with its fostering of a culture of death in promoting things like abortion and euthanasia, when combined with developing a culture in which it is unwise to raise unwelcome questions, can and has led to deadly results. The Nazis invented the gas chambers, but the Soviets used the gulags, the Chinese and their buddies used the re-education camps. The Cambodian socialists used the killing fields to the same effect, as do other socialist regimes given enough time and enough power, and the Australian Labor Party subscribes to the same ideology. What does the left want? They love to target people they don't like. I have already pointed out how their particular target is Christians and white Christians who are male as particular objects of hatred. But maybe the latter point will do for another time. The leftists are committed to identity politics and always have been. That's been their entire shtick, and that includes the leftist ALP. They don't like due process in law, except for themselves, and they are not all that fussed about human rights, except for themselves. Oh, and they cheapen human life, certainly at the beginning and at the end of life. And if you question what is going on, they too will have you fired, drum you out of business, ruin your life, ruin your finances by endless lawfare against you via the anti-discrimination tribunals. And they have an ideology for which there are no rules, and inevitably socialists want complete power of life and death over those they don't like. Hey, just like the Nazis. So that in a nutshell is Labor's war on life, and part 6 will be Labor's war on our kids. Thanks for watching.